The spotlight was white hot. The Copa Room at the Sands Hotel, Las Vegas. February 1965. Midnight show. Standing room only. 2,000 people packed into a space built for 1,500. Cigarette smoke thick enough to cut with a knife. The air electric with anticipation. The Rat Pack was on stage. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., the Trinity, the three kings of cool. Together, they were unstoppable. Separately, they were legends. But together they were magic. They were 40 minutes into the show. Frank had just finished Fly Me to the Moon. Dean was swaying slightly, glass of something amber in his hand, that sleepy smile on his face. Sammy was at the piano, fingers dancing across the keys, sweat already soaking through his shirt. The audience was in heaven. And then Dean opened his mouth. "Hey, Smokey," Dean called out, using his nickname for Sammy. His words were slightly slurred. The drunk act. The lovable lush. The character Dean played so well that people forgot it was a character. Sammy looked up from the piano, grinning. "Yeah, Dino? I just realized something," Dean said, taking a sip from his glass. "What's that?" Dean gestured around the room. At the chandeliers. The plush seats. The well-dressed crowd. "You know, this room is really something. Beautiful, right? Expensive. Classy." "Sure is," Sammy agreed, still smiling, waiting for the punchline. Dean's smile widened. "Makes you wonder what they're gonna do when they find out you've been in here." The audience laughed. Sammy's smile froze. Dean kept going. "I mean, they're gonna have to fumigate this whole place. Get rid of the smell." Bigger laughs now. People were howling. Dean was on a roll. "And they're probably gonna have to repaint everything. Can't have the chocolate fingerprints on the music stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. Like someone had unplugged the world." Frank Sinatra had stepped to the microphone. His hand was up. One finger pointed at Dean. His face was stone. "Dean." One word. But it cut through the room like a knife. The laughter died. Dean turned, his smile still in place. But something flickered in his eyes. Confusion. Then recognition. "What?" Dean said, trying to keep it light. "I'm just having some fun with Smokey. He knows I'm kidding." Frank took 3 steps toward Dean. Slowly. Deliberately. The audience was utterly silent now. "Dean," Frank said again, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the room. "That's my brother you're talking about." To understand what happened next, you need to understand the chemistry of the Rat Pack. On the surface, it looked like 3 friends goofing around, making jokes, breaking each other's balls. That's what the audience paid for. The illusion of intimacy. The fantasy that they were watching real friendship instead of choreographed performance. And most of it was real. Frank, Dean, and Sammy genuinely loved each other. They'd been through too much together not to. Late nights and early mornings. Triumphs and failures. Marriages and divorces. They'd held each other up when the world tried to knock them down. But there were rules. Unspoken, but understood. You could tease Sammy about being short, about having one eye, about his ego, about his energy, about trying too hard. But you never, ever made jokes about his blackness. Not in front of an audience. Not in 1965. Because those jokes weren't really jokes. They were reminders. Reminders that no matter how famous Sammy became, no matter how talented, no matter how loved, there were people in that room who still saw him as less than human. Dean knew this. But Dean was drunk, really drunk, not the performance drunk, the actual kind. And when Dean was actually drunk, which was rare, his judgment slipped, and Frank Sinatra saw it happening in real time. "Dean," Frank said again, his voice harder now. "Apologize." Dean's smile vanished. "Frank, come on, it's just—" Now, the word was like a gunshot. Dean looked at Frank. Then, at Sammy. Sammy was still standing at the piano, his face carefully neutral. Not angry, not hurt. Just blank. The mask he'd learned to wear since childhood. The mask that said, "I'm fine, this doesn't bother me, I'm used to it." But Frank knew better. Frank had seen that mask before. In hotel lobbies when they wouldn't give Sammy a room in the same building where he'd just performed. In restaurants that made him use the back entrance. In the faces of people who asked for autographs and then wiped their hands afterward. Frank had spent years trying to tear that mask off Sammy's face. Trying to create spaces where Sammy didn't have to wear it. Where he could just be himself, be safe, be loved. And Dean had just put that mask right back on him, in front of 2,000 people. For a laugh. "Dean," Frank said one more time, "you're going to walk over to that piano, you're going to look Sammy in the eye, and you're going to apologize. Or you're going to walk off this stage and you're never walking back on." The audience was barely breathing. Dean stood there, glass in hand, the weight of what he'd done slowly sinking in. He looked at Sammy again, really looked at him this time, and he saw it. The hurt, hidden behind the smile, but there, always there. Dean set his glass down on the piano. He walked over to Sammy. The two men stood facing each other. Dean's eyes were wet. "Smokey," he said quietly. "I'm sorry. That was stupid. I was trying to be funny and I wasn't. I was just cruel." Sammy didn't move. Dean continued, his voice cracking. "You're my friend, my brother, and I forgot. I forgot what it's like for you out there. What you deal with every single day. And I'm sorry." The silence in the room was absolute. Sammy looked at Dean for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the performance smile, the real one. He pulled Dean into a hug. "I know, Pally," Sammy said softly. "I know." But Frank wasn't done. He walked to the front of the stage, looked out at the audience, all those faces. Some uncomfortable, some confused, some angry that the show had stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank said, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant he was about to say something important. "I want to explain something to you. Something you need to understand." He pointed at Sammy. "This man right here is the most talented entertainer I have ever seen. He can sing better than me. He can dance better than anyone alive. He can play every instrument on this stage. He works harder than any 3 performers combined." Frank's voice got quieter. But every single day of his life he has to deal with people who look at him and see his skin before they see his talent. He has to smile at jokes that aren't funny. He has to pretend he doesn't hear the things people whisper. He has to use back entrances and freight elevators because some hotels don't want him walking through the lobby. The audience was completely still. And you know what? He never complains, he never stops smiling, he never stops performing. He just keeps going, keeps working, keeps being brilliant. Frank turned to look at Dean and Sammy. So when someone makes a joke about his skin color, even if that someone is his friend, even if it's supposed to be harmless, it's not harmless. Because those jokes are what allow the real hatred to hide. They're what make it okay to treat him like he's less than human. Frank looked back at the audience. "We're not doing that anymore. Not on this stage, not in this room, not while I'm breathing." He picked up his microphone. "Now, we're going to finish this show. We're going to entertain you. We're going to make you laugh. But we're going to do it with respect, for each other, and if you can't handle that, there's the door." Nobody moved. Frank nodded. "All right then, let's sing." What happened after that show became legendary. The 3 of them went back to Frank's suite at the Sands. Just the 3 of them. No entourage, no hangers-on, no audience. Dean poured drinks for all of them. Scotch, neat. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Sammy spoke. "You didn't have to do that, Frank." "Yes, I did," Frank said. "He was just drunk, just goofing around. I've heard worse." "That's the problem," Frank said, his voice tired. "You've heard worse. You've heard so much worse that you think what Dean said tonight was okay. And it's not okay, Sam. It's never okay." Dean sat with his head in his hands. "I keep replaying it in my head," Dean said. And I can't believe I said those things. I can't believe I used you for a cheap laugh." "You were drunk," Sammy said. "That's not an excuse," Dean replied. "Drunk or sober, I should know better. I do know better." He looked up at Sammy. "I grew up poor, Smokey. I worked in illegal casinos. I boxed for money. I've been looked down on my whole life. And tonight I did the same thing to you. I became the thing I hate." "You're not that thing," Sammy said quietly. "Tonight I was." Frank stood up and walked to the window, looked out at the neon glow of the strip. "You know what the sad part is?" Frank said. "Most of that audience didn't even understand why I stopped you, Dean. They thought I was overreacting. They thought it was just part of the act." He turned back to them. "Because they've never had to live in Sammy's skin. They've never had to smile through that kind of pain. So they don't see it. They don't want to see it." "So what do we do?" Dean asked. "We do better," Frank said simply. "Starting tomorrow. Starting now." The next night, the Rat Pack took the stage again. Same room, same crowd, same electricity. But something was different. Dean walked to the microphone during his opening bit. He wasn't doing the drunk act tonight. He was sober. Sharp, serious. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dean said, "before we get started, I want to say something. Last night I made some jokes that I thought were funny. They weren't. They were hurtful. And they were directed at the best friend I have in this world." He looked at Sammy. "Sammy Davis Jr. is not just talented. He's not just hardworking. He's one of the best human beings I've ever known. And I disrespected him. In front of all of you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry to him, and I'm sorry to anyone who was hurt by what I said." The audience was silent. "From now on," Dean continued, "when you see the Rat Pack, you're going to see three men who love each other, who respect each other, who would do anything for each other. And if you don't like that, if you came here expecting us to tear each other down for your entertainment, you came to the wrong show." Then Dean smiled. The real smile. "Now, let's have some fun." And they did. Years later, in 1987, Dean Martin's son died in a plane crash. Dean was destroyed. Completely broken. He stopped performing, stopped appearing in public, became a ghost in his own life. Sammy called him every single day, not to cheer him up, not to give advice, just to talk, to be there, to remind Dean that he wasn't alone. One day, about 6 months after the crash, Dean finally asked, "Why do you keep calling me Smokey? I'm nothing right now." "Because you're my brother," Sammy said, "and brothers don't abandon each other." "Even after what I said to you that night? In '65? "Especially after that night," Sammy replied. "Because that night you showed me something important." "What?" "That even good people make mistakes. But the good ones apologize. And the great ones change." Dean was quiet for a long time. "I love you, Smokey. I love you too, Dino." In 1990, Sammy Davis Jr. was dying of throat cancer. He could barely speak, could barely move. But when Dean Martin called, Sammy always answered. "Smokey," Dean said, his own voice thick with tears. "I need you to know something." Sammy waited, his breathing labored. "That night in '65, when Frank made me apologize, I was angry. I thought he was overreacting. I thought you were being too sensitive. But I was wrong. You weren't too sensitive. I was too ignorant." Dean's voice broke. "You taught me how to be a better man, not by yelling at me, not by hating me, but by forgiving me, by loving me anyway. And I will never forget that." Sammy reached for his notepad, wrote slowly with a shaking hand. "You're my brother, Dino, always." 2 months later, Sammy Davis Jr. died. He was 64 years old. Dean Martin attended the funeral. Sat in the back. Didn't speak to reporters. Just sat there, tears streaming down his face, saying goodbye to the man who taught him that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing we can do. The story of that night in February 1965 is not about a joke that went too far. It's about Frank Sinatra understanding something the audience didn't. That humor built on someone else's pain isn't humor, it's violence. And that true friendship means protecting the people you love, even when it's uncomfortable. Even when it stops the show. Even when it costs you laughs. Frank Sinatra stepped in immediately that night. Not because Sammy couldn't defend himself, but because Sammy shouldn't have to. Not from his own brother, not on a stage where he'd earned the right to be seen as equal. Not ever. And somewhere in the archives there's a recording of that show. You can hear the music stop, you can hear Frank's voice go cold. You can hear 2,000 people realize that what they thought was entertainment was actually education. A lesson in what it means to stand up for someone. Even when that someone is standing right next to you. Especially then.